The ballroom glowed with gold and crystal, every surface polished to a mirror shine. Chandeliers dazzled overhead, scattering light across a sea of faces. Politicians, celebrities, old money titans, all gathered for the wedding of the year. Atlanta's social media pulsed with envy and hashtags, but at the center of it all, Amara Grant felt nothing but numbness. She stood in front of the velvet-draped altar, the lace veil brushing her bare shoulders, heart pounding beneath the silk bodice of a dress chosen by someone else. Her mother's voice, a memory soft and distant, was nowhere to be found. In its place was the cool, familiar command of her stepmother, Marcia. "Chin up, Amara. You represent the Grant legacy tonight. Smile." Beside her, the perfect groom, Eli Ford, 35, polished, powerful, with eyes that never really met hers. The ceremony blurred by in a parade of vows and applause, but Amara only felt the weight of eyes watching, judging, waiting for her to slip. When the last toast was made, Amara found herself whisked away to a quiet suite by Marcia and a pair of corporate lawyers. The room's grandeur could not mask the tension in the air. Marcia pressed a leather folder into Amara's hands. "You're smart, darling. Read this carefully and sign. It's just a formality. The Ford family has their own lawyers. Everyone does this now." Amara opened the folder with trembling fingers. The marriage settlement agreement was thick. Pages and pages of clauses, restrictions, stipulations. Every paragraph was cold, transactional. If either party files for divorce before 5 years, all assets revert to their original owners. If Amara Grant is found in violation of any morality clause, she forfeits all rights to Ford or Grant family assets. If Amara Grant produces an heir within the first 2 years, a trust is established for the child, but all business voting rights remain with the senior family partners. Her breath caught on a clause she hadn't seen in any draft. If the Grant family's real estate division fails to meet quarterly profit targets, the Ford family reserves the right to liquidate assets to recoup losses. Marcia's voice was low, urgent. "This is what it takes to save us. You want the Grant name to survive? To save your father's company? Sign it. Eli's a good man. He's what you need." Amara looked at her father, standing silently behind Marcia, gaze averted. The same man who had once bounced her on his knee, teaching her to draw floor plans, now seemed smaller, more afraid of his wife than he'd ever been of a business rival. Eli Ford stepped forward, his tone professional. "We're both grown-ups, Amara. We both know what's at stake. If you walk away, I walk too, and the banks foreclose by Friday. Sign and we're partners. That's all this is." The words were a slap. Not wife and husband. Partners in a contract. Bargaining chips in a game Amara had never agreed to play. A sudden memory flashed. Her first day at architecture school. The taste of freedom. The hope that she might build something real. She glanced at her phone, saw a missed call from Isaac, the only man who had ever truly seen her, now lost in the shadow of this deal. She closed her eyes, wishing for her mother, for anyone who might fight for her. But there was only the ticking of a grandfather clock, the smell of perfume, and the pen in her hand. With trembling resolve, Amara signed. Marcia exhaled in triumph, eyes already on her phone as she texted the lawyers. Eli nodded, the faintest hint of relief crossing his face. Her father managed a weak, "Thank you, baby," before slipping away to answer a call. Alone in the suite, Amara stared at her new name on the contract. For a moment, she felt nothing at all. Then, quietly, the pain crept in. The music from the ballroom swelled through the doors. On the dance floor, the celebration continued. A parade of champagne, laughter, and headlines about Atlanta's newest power couple. But for Amara, the fairy tale had ended before it began. She wasn't a bride. She was collateral. Her heart, her freedom, and her future all auctioned off to keep a legacy afloat. And somewhere in the glittering city, the first whisper of a different legacy stirred in her chest. Not a legacy built on deals and betrayals, but on her own terms. Tonight she had been sold, but the story of her revenge had only just begun. Before the golden glass, before Atlanta's society pages called her Mrs. Ford, Amara Grant had been just a girl with calloused hands and a head full of dreams. It started in the hot, hopeful days after high school. Amara, newly accepted to Georgia Tech's architecture program, spending her afternoons sketching city skylines from the roof of her grandmother's modest house on the south side. She was the Grant heiress in name, but the real world was her sanctuary. Blueprints, brick dust, and the unpolished laughter of neighbors who loved her for herself, not her pedigree. And it was there that she met Isaac. He was a barista at the corner coffee shop, working nights while juggling a scholarship in civil engineering. Isaac was warm, funny, fiercely protective of his little sister and mother. They shared a love of old buildings and bad puns, passing notes across study tables and spending weekends exploring abandoned train stations. With Isaac, Amara felt truly seen. He never cared about her last name or the family legacy. He cared about her sketches, her jokes, the way her hands shook when she stood up to present a new idea in class. "You're going to change this city, Mara," he'd say, brushing paint from her cheek. "And you'll do it your way." Those were the happiest days of her life, until the Grant world closed in. Her stepmother Marcia always seemed to materialize at the edges of those memories, smiling coldly at Amara's low-rent boyfriend, dismissing her designs as too social justice, not enough profit. Marcia's own daughters, twins with perfect hair and poisoned tongues, rolled their eyes at every mention of Isaac. Her father grew distant, distracted by the family's mounting debts and Marcia's increasingly frantic plans to save the company. It started subtly. Amara's school accounts were frozen for audit. Her studio hours were cut. She lost her place in a major student competition after a mysterious administrative error. When Isaac tried to help, he was suddenly blackballed from internship interviews. Every door he knocked on closed by a whispered word from someone at Grant Holdings. Amara confronted Marcia, desperate for answers. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. Marcia didn't bother to deny it. "Sweetheart, love is for college novels. You're a Grant. You have responsibilities. If you want your family to survive, you'll make the right alliances. That's what women like us do." "But I love him," Amara choked out. "And I love my family's legacy," Marcia replied, her tone icy. "Which will you choose?" The choice was rigged. Within weeks, Isaac left Atlanta for a construction job up north. Amara's last text, "Don't let them change you. You're worth more than this," sat unread on his phone. Lost in a sea of goodbyes, her world narrowed. Marcia dangled promises. "Finish your degree, marry the right man, and you'll get a seat at the table. Or keep fighting and watch the Grants lose everything. Your grandmother's house, your scholarships, your father's last shred of dignity." Amara returned to school with her spirit battered, but not broken. She poured herself into design, dreaming up community centers and affordable housing, plans that Marcia lost in favor of luxury condos and profit-driven monstrosities. When she graduated, it was straight into the Grant offices. Her job title sounded impressive, but her every move was monitored. The twins mocked her. Marcia issued daily lectures about optics and the power of connections. Her father avoided her gaze, a hollowed-out version of the man who'd once cheered at her science fair wins. And then, just as Amara thought she might carve out a corner of the company for herself, the real bombshell landed. The Grant Empire was bankrupt. Decades of risky deals and Marcia's ambitious expansions had gutted the balance sheets. The only hope was a merger, sealed by a marriage to Eli Ford, the city's most eligible and calculating bachelor. Amara protested, pleaded, tried to propose alternatives. She was told, in so many words, that she owed the family her loyalty, that this marriage was her duty, that her feelings were a liability. In the end, Marcia's smile said it all. You'll thank us one day. Sacrifice now. Secure your place forever. Isn't that what family is for? On the eve of her wedding, Amara sat in her childhood room, surrounded by packing boxes and old sketches. She dialed Isaac's number, but hung up before the call could connect. She wiped her eyes and drew, blue lines on white paper, a city she could build for someone else, but never for herself. The next morning, she put on the dress Marcia chose, pinned her grandmother's brooch to the bouquet, and walked down an aisle lined with strangers. Her heart wasn't hers anymore, but somewhere, deep inside, a blueprint for something better waited. Quiet, steady, patient. They could auction her future, but not her soul. The weeks after the wedding moved in a daze of photo shoots, social invitations, and whispered expectations. Amara was everywhere, on magazine covers, at charity galas, giving interviews about her exciting new life as Mrs. Eli Ford. Atlanta loved a fairy tale, and the press played their part, printing glowing profiles and photos of the power couple at every ribbon cutting. But the palace was built on sand. Amara felt it with every forced smile. Eli was attentive in public, draping his arm over hers for the cameras, delivering clever sound bites about our vision for the city. But in private, their marriage was all business. He traveled often, taking late calls with men whose names Amara recognized from her father's blacklists. The nights he was home, he worked in a locked office, spreadsheets glowing long past midnight. One evening, Amara wandered into the office to find Eli's laptop open. Lines of numbers and cryptic transaction codes filled the screen. At the top, Ford/Grant Holdings, overseas asset transfers. Eli looked up, irritation flickering. Looking for something? I thought we were partners, Amara replied, forcing lightness. But I don't even know what half this means. He shut the laptop, smiling a politician's smile. It means the company's finally solvent. That's all you need to know. But she knew. The company wasn't being saved. It was being used. Something ugly gnawed at the edge of her thoughts. Money moving in circles, subsidiaries she'd never heard of. Checks signed with her name she hadn't written. The unease grew after Amara's stepmother and the twins moved into a penthouse paid for by company perks. Her father was given a consulting role and quietly pushed aside. At family dinners, Marcia and Eli spoke in half-finished sentences, trading glances over Amara's head. One afternoon, Amara overheard a heated conversation as she passed the boardroom. Marcia's voice, sharp. She's not as dumb as you think, Eli. If she starts asking questions, we're all exposed. Eli, cold. Relax, she signed everything. When this is over, she'll have more than enough, if she keeps quiet. The twins giggled, their voices dripping with condescension. Amara's skin prickled. She tried to question her father, but he only shook his head. It's complicated, baby. Just trust me. Trust the family. But trust had already been broken. Within months, the company's profits miraculously soared, but only on paper. Amara noticed new charities popping up, properties bought in shell corporations, sudden cash infusions with no clear origin. When she confronted Eli one night, he snapped. "This is what you wanted, right? A seat at the table? Well, here it is. Don't ruin it for everyone." The final blow came in the form of a courier envelope. Inside were documents for Amara's signature, new investments, more asset transfers, even a request to use her personal account as collateral. She confronted Marcia, who only smiled. "Welcome to the real Grant family business, darling. You have your name on the door now. That's all that matters." It was a trap. If anything went wrong, the paper trail led straight to Amara. She went to Isaac, her last safe place, only to find his number disconnected. She realized with a sick jolt that Marcia had made sure Amara's entire world was contained, surveilled, and isolated. In a final act of defiance, Amara refused to sign the latest documents. The next morning, her father told her quietly, "They'll do it without you. You're only as valuable as your compliance." That night, Amara stared at her reflection. The gilded cage she'd once called a home now closing around her. She knew now. Eli had never loved her. She was a pawn to launder money and give legitimacy to dirty deals. Marcia and the twins were playing both sides, waiting for the moment to blame her and escape clean. Her father, broken by regret, was powerless. But Amara was not powerless, not yet. She began to quietly collect documents, save emails, note conversations. She memorized every code and signature. She listened and waited and planned. For the first time in months, a fierce clarity cut through the numbness. They had auctioned her heart, but the next move would be hers. It happened faster than Amara could have imagined. A storm that swept away the last of her illusions. She'd always thought there would be a warning, a chance to defend herself. Instead, she awoke one morning to pounding on her penthouse door and the blinding glare of TV cameras in the lobby. Her phone was already vibrating with dozens of missed calls, texts, and headlines that made her blood run cold. Grantford Holdings under investigation for financial crimes. $1 billion bride at center of laundering scandal. Within hours it was everywhere. Her name trending on social media, her face plastered across every news outlet from Atlanta to New York. The anchors used her wedding photo, her smile frozen in naive trust. The captions beneath the images were a barrage of accusation. Amara Grant Ford, the beautiful heiress-turned-schemer. Sources allege she was the brains behind the shell corporations. Secret accounts, offshore money, criminal genius, or pawn. In the first wave of chaos, Amara's calls to Eli went straight to voicemail. Marcia's number was disconnected. The twins posted photos of themselves vacationing in Europe with captions like, "Family first, always, sending love from Milan." Her father, silent, unreachable, his office door locked. Then, the authorities arrived. Agents swept through her home, seizing laptops, files, even the jewelry gifted to her on her wedding day. The neighbors gawked, whispering as she was escorted out for questioning. She wasn't arrested, but the implication hung in the air. The headlines only grew harsher. At the police station, no one offered comfort. Eli's lawyers arrived, but not for her. They delivered a statement. "Mr. Ford is devastated by these allegations and is cooperating fully. He was unaware of any improper activity by his wife." The words stung worse than a slap. Amara felt the room spin. She reached for her father, but he stood behind Marcia, his face hard and closed. "We need to distance ourselves," he murmured. "The board needs a scapegoat. I'm sorry, baby. This is business." Within 24 hours, Amara was persona non grata. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her credit cards declined. She was served with divorce papers, delivered by a junior associate who couldn't meet her eyes. The settlement offered nothing but silence. Sign a non-disclosure, admit to mismanagement, and walk away. The media painted her as a villain. Talk shows dissected her every photo, searching for signs of greed. Old friends surfaced with stories of her supposed extravagance and arrogance. Paparazzi followed her to the grocery store, snapping pictures of her in the same clothes twice, speculating about her fall from grace. She tried to fight back, calling the only real lawyer she trusted. But her calls went unanswered. Everyone who'd once wanted her name on their client list now fled from the Grant Ford scandal. The betrayal cut deeper than she thought possible. In the darkest hours, Amara retreated to her childhood home, only to find her room emptied, her keepsakes gone. Marcia greeted her at the door with cold civility. "You can't stay here, Amara. It's not safe. You brought this on yourself." Her father didn't look up from his phone. "I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do." It was in that moment, standing on the porch of a house she'd helped design, with the world collapsing around her, that Amara understood the truth. She had never really belonged here. Not as a daughter, not as a wife, not even as a Grant. That night, with nowhere left to go, she checked into a rundown motel. The clerk recognized her from the news and gave her a room at the end of a lonely hall. In the faded mirror, she saw a woman stripped of every comfort, every connection, every illusion. Her heart ached, not for the money or the titles, but for the way her world had shrunk to a single silent room. But even as despair threatened to swallow her, a spark of defiance remained. Amara looked at her reflection, jaw set, and whispered, "You took everything, but you will not take me." She would find a way back, not to their world, but to one of her own making. The first days after her public fall were a blur of exhaustion and humiliation. The city that had once celebrated Amara Grant now seemed eager to witness her suffering. Her face, the billion-dollar bride, the architect of the scandal, became a symbol of shame, plastered across screens and gossip blogs. But all the headlines and hashtags faded to static when the lights in her motel room flickered out for good, and the front desk clerk refused her last, overdrawn credit card. She spent her first real night on the street in the shell of an old bus station, backpack clutched to her chest. The air was thick with July humidity and the sharp, unforgettable stench of Atlanta's forgotten corners. Every noise, sirens, laughter, distant traffic, kept her awake. In the morning, Amara found herself at a downtown church, where the smell of pancakes and cheap coffee lured her in. She sat in a back pew, hands shaking, until an older woman with warm eyes and a choir robe pressed a plate into her hands. "You look like you could use a friend, baby," she said. Amara almost wept with gratitude. She ate slowly, savoring the first real food in days, ignoring the whispers around her. It didn't take long for someone to recognize her. "Ain't that the Grant girl?" a man muttered. "Never thought I'd see her here." Word traveled fast. Some faces hardened. Others looked on with a pity that stung even worse than judgment. Amara felt the weight of every time she'd walked past the city's hungry blind to need. Finding work was harder than she'd expected. Her degree meant nothing here. Her name, was poison. The only jobs available were day labor, cleaning offices, hauling boxes at a dusty warehouse. She worked double shifts for cash, sleeping in shelters or, when she was lucky, on a friend's floor. Old classmates ignored her. Her stepsisters laughed online, posting memes about rags to riches to rags. But in the margins, Amara met people who had nothing left to lose, and still gave what little they had. Maria, a single mum, who let Amara share her lunch and offered her an old pair of sneakers. Jerome, a former Grant Holdings security guard, who lost his job when the company folded, but never spoke a word of bitterness. Mrs. Freeman, the choir lady, who pressed a $20 bill into Amara's hand with a whispered, "This ain't charity, honey. It's survival." Each kindness softened the sharpest edges of her shame. She learned how to stretch a dollar, how to blend in, how to listen. She discovered a strength in herself that no boardroom or gala had ever called forth. A stubbornness to keep going, to get up each morning, no matter how low she had fallen. Some nights, alone under the city's bruised sky, Amara would pull out her old sketchbook, tattered but surviving the storm. She drew tiny homes, gardens on rooftops, shelters built from salvaged brick. Her hands remembered how to create even when her mind was heavy with grief. What hurt most wasn't the hunger or the stares. It was the memory of her old life, the feeling of her father's hand on her shoulder, Isaac's laughter, the sound of her own name spoken with love. She wrote a letter to Isaac, one she'd never send. "I lost everything, but I think I've found myself, or at least the part they couldn't buy or ruin." Sometimes on her hardest days, she walked past the Grant skyscraper, now shuttered and abandoned, with a for sale sign, half buried in weeds. She felt nothing for it, but she did pause in front of the construction site down the block, where Maria and Jerome worked. She waved. They waved back. It was not much, but it was real. The headlines faded. The world moved on to new scandals. But Amara remained. Day by day, callus by callus, she built a new foundation. One night, Mrs. Freeman found her sleeping on a cot at the church. "You're not meant to be lost forever, child. There's a place for you yet, but you gotta want it. You gotta build it." Amara squeezed her hand and nodded, for the first time in months, believing it might be true. Her enemies had cast her down, certain she'd never rise again. But they didn't know what could grow in the cracks. Didn't know the quiet power of a heart that refused to be auctioned off, broken, or forgotten. Her comeback wouldn't be for them. It would be for herself, and for everyone who had ever been left behind. The morning started like any other in Amara's new life. A bus ride at dawn, hands aching from warehouse work, a pocket full of loose change for breakfast. She was halfway through a cup of burnt coffee when she spotted an old, familiar face in the corner of the diner. Her father's younger brother, Uncle Reggie. Uncle Reggie had always been the family's wild card, too soft-spoken for boardrooms, too honest for deals. Amara hadn't seen him since the scandal, and she almost walked out, heart pounding. But Reggie beckoned her over, his kind eyes full of sorrow and something else. Purpose. "Sit, child," he said, sliding a battered manila envelope across the Formica table. "I watched what they did to you. What they did to all of us." Amara stared at the envelope, wary. "Why now?" Reggie leaned in, voice low. "Because you're the only one who can do something with this. I kept quiet too long. Thought I could protect your father. Thought if I stayed out of the way, they'd spare me. But the night you lost everything, I found my spine." Inside the envelope was a weathered black ledger, a thick notebook, every page scrawled with numbers, names, dates, and cryptic notes. Reggie's handwriting interspersed with Marcia's, Eli's, and, chillingly, her own forged signature. Next to each entry, a series of initials and coded references. Wire transfers to shell companies in the Caymans. Payments to city inspectors. Kickbacks for zoning variances. Laundered donations to the Ford Foundation. Sudden cash infusions marked with her name. Amara flipped through, her hands shaking. There were property deeds in fake names, lists of bribes paid to local politicians, even a record of hush money given to whistleblowers who'd tried to come forward before. At the back of the ledger, a handful of receipts and bank statements were paper-clipped together, evidence of the most recent deals, dated just weeks before the family's empire crumbled. Reggie watched her process the information. I tried to warn your father, but Marcia kept him too deep in the dark. I only started copying the records after I saw what Eli was doing, using your accounts, your signature. They never thought I was smart enough to notice. Why are you giving this to me? Amara whispered. Because you're the only Grant with a soul left, Reggie said. I lost everything too. I'm old and tired. But you... He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. You can still build something honest. Or you can use this to take them all down. Do what I couldn't. The weight of the ledger felt both terrifying and electric in her hands. Amara understood instantly. This was not just a key to her own vindication, but a weapon. Proof of the entire criminal machine that had destroyed her life and so many others. She spent the next days poring over every page, making digital copies, and reaching out to old contacts. Journalists, an old law school friend, and finally, Maria and Jerome. Each time she shared a small piece of what she'd found, their reactions were the same. Shock, followed by a fierce resolve. You could go to the police, Jerome said, and have it buried by someone on Marcia's payroll, Amara replied. No, we need a plan. We need allies. But she was no longer alone. Reggie introduced her to an underground network of people the Grants and Fords had ruined. A former city inspector blackballed for refusing a bribe, a developer who lost his business to a crooked land deal, a neighbor who'd fought foreclosure and lost. Each person added their own puzzle piece. For the first time, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. Not just for revenge, but for justice. Real, public, undeniable. She took long walks in the city at night, the ledger always in her bag, her mind racing with ideas. Her sketches changed. Not mansions and towers, but homes for families like Maria's. Green spaces for kids. Places where no one was ever auctioned away. One night, Maria joined her on a park bench. You got fire in you again, Amara. Don't let them put it out. Whatever you do next, we got your back. Amara looked at her friend, at the city lights, at the ledger in her lap. She made her decision. They had auctioned her heart. Now she would auction their secrets. And this time, the highest bidder would be the truth. Amara moved with quiet precision, the secret ledger her compass and shield. Every name in its pages represented a casualty of the Grant Ford machine, and, she realized, a potential ally in her fight for justice. Her days were spent in warehouses and construction sites, but her nights belonged to a different purpose, building a coalition in the shadows. Her first step was to contact Tony Baylor, an investigative reporter with a reputation for taking down Atlanta's untouchables. Tony, A sharp-eyed black woman whose front-page exposés had brought down police chiefs and corporate fraudsters alike, met Amara in a tiny coffee shop tucked beneath a MARTA station. They spoke in hushed voices, the secret ledger spread between them like a forbidden spellbook. Tony's eyes widened as she flipped through the evidence. "You're not playing, Amara. This is enough to start a fire in City Hall." "I want more than headlines," Amara replied, her tone steely. "I want the system exposed, not just the family. But I can't do this alone." Tony nodded. "Then let's get you some backup." Next came Samuel Brooks, a legendary attorney known as the Barrister of Auburn Avenue. Samuel had won the city's biggest civil rights and class action cases, and though he'd never much liked the Grants, he'd respected Amara's late grandmother, a community icon in her own right. When Amara presented the ledger, Samuel's frown deepened, then turned to a slow, dangerous smile. "They built their empire on the backs of folks like us," he said, his gravelly voice rumbling. "But now you got a record. We'll need witnesses, airtight evidence, and a way to keep you safe. If you're ready, I'll put my team on this. But you need to know, they'll come for you harder than ever." "I'm ready," Amara answered. And for the first time, she truly meant it. Tony and Samuel introduced her to a growing network of victims and witnesses. A housing advocate whose nonprofit was bankrupted by a Grant/Ford land grab. A city clerk with years of emails documenting bribery. Former Grant employees, now scraping by, eager to tell their stories if someone promised to listen. Amara realized her family's web of cruelty had left a trail of heartbreak, but also a community of survivors. They began holding secret meetings in the back of churches, union halls, and a local bar that closed early for special events. Each night, the circle grew larger. Samuel's team coached them on testimony, how to document threats, how to secure copies of every file. Tony's contacts in the newsroom and city government quietly watched for leaks and sabotage. Amara kept her own circle small. Maria, Jerome, Uncle Reggie, each sworn to secrecy. But as she moved through Atlanta, she noticed small signals. A nod from a city bus driver, a text from a former rival, a meal left at her door. The city's quiet majority, those hurt, overlooked, underestimated, were rooting for her. One night, Samuel's associate intercepted a message meant for a Grant lawyer. "Amara Grant has resurfaced. Find out who she's talking to. Silence her before the ledger leaks." The danger was real, but so was the momentum. Amara and her allies began gathering more than just stories. They collected evidence. Digital backups of property sales. Email trails showing how city officials were paid off. Phone records that put Marcia and Eli at the center of the laundering ring. Amara felt the noose tightening, but also the thrill of agency, of finally steering her own story. Tony's first article was almost ready, a bombshell exposé timed to coincide with a lawsuit Samuel's team was drafting. But Amara was careful. She insisted on protecting the most vulnerable witnesses, and met with victims one-on-one, promising to shield them from the storm she knew was coming. And then, in the hush before dawn, Amara stood at the edge of the city, the skyline reflecting her battered hope. She clutched the ledger and thought of her mother's voice, of Isaac's faith, of all she'd lost. She was no longer alone. When the truth finally exploded, she wouldn't just be a victim, or a pawn, or a disgraced daughter. She would be the architect of her own revenge, and the foundation of a new legacy for everyone who had ever been auctioned away. For the first time in years, Amara woke to purpose. She was still sleeping on Maria's couch, still counting pennies for the bus, still dodging curious eyes. But now every sunrise was an opportunity, not just another hurdle. Her family's secrets would soon see daylight. But what then? Amara realized that revenge, while satisfying, could not be her whole story. She needed to build something lasting, something no one could ever take from her again. She spent her mornings on job sites and in supply stores, soaking up every detail of the city's new affordable housing projects. In the afternoons, she met with Samuel and Tony, strategizing around the upcoming legal action and exposé. But it was her evenings that felt most alive, sketching with kids in community centers, swapping design ideas with Jerome, and listening to mothers like Maria describe what home truly meant. Out of these conversations, Amara's new vision was born. She started with what she had: a few architectural skills, the trust of people who had nothing left to lose, and a passion for transformation. Her first project was humble: a derelict house at the edge of Vine City, bought cheap with pooled donations from church bake sales and Tony's GoFundMe campaign. Amara drew up plans for a space that would do more than shelter a family. It would anchor a neighborhood. She called it the Phoenix House. Rebuilt from ashes, meant for new beginnings. Word spread quickly. Volunteers, many of them former Grant Holdings workers or people the company had displaced, showed up with hammers, paint cans, and home-cooked meals. Samuel helped her set up a nonprofit, Open Door, ATL. Within months, 2 more houses were under construction, with waiting lists full of families eager for dignity and stability. Tony's first article hit just as the Phoenix House was completed. The headline was electric. Betrayed heiress rebuilds Atlanta, brick by brick. Photos of Amara, smiling, paint-splattered, surrounded by neighbors, traveled farther than any tabloid scandal ever had. People began to whisper, then speak openly. She's not the villain. She's one of us. Donations trickled in. Old rivals offered resources. Even a handful of city officials, sensing the shifting wind, quietly offered zoning help or expedited permits. But not everyone cheered. Marcia's lawyers sent cease and desist letters, accusing Amara of intellectual property theft and defamation. Trolls filled her inbox with threats, calling her a fraud and a traitor. The twins started a whisper campaign about Amara's true motives, hoping to sow doubt in her supporters. Amara pressed on. She turned every attack into fuel. A TV debate, where she out-argued Marcia's latest puppet and exposed Grant Holdings' fake charities on live air. A viral TikTok of her teaching local teens how to build garden boxes out of salvaged wood. A block party at the Phoenix House, where she served barbecue to everyone, including those who'd once mocked her. Meanwhile, Samuel's legal team quietly prepared their case, and Tony's second exposé revealed the full extent of the Grant Ford laundering ring, sending shockwaves through Atlanta's business community. But Amara's proudest moments weren't measured in headlines. They came late at night, walking through quiet streets where porch lights glowed, and children's laughter spilled from newly safe homes. She saw hope where there had only been loss, saw herself for the first time as a creator rather than a casualty. One afternoon, as she hung curtains in a freshly painted living room, Maria squeezed her hand. "You changed this whole street, Amara, and you changed us. Don't ever let them tell you you're less than what you've built." Amara smiled, a fierce joy filling her chest. "They tried to erase me, but they made me stronger. This is only the beginning." She'd been auctioned, humiliated, and nearly destroyed. But with every blueprint, every brick, every act of stubborn hope, Amara was designing not just her comeback, but a city that no one would ever auction away again. The storm didn't come with thunder, but with headlines. In the pre-dawn quiet, Atlanta woke to the front page of the city's biggest newspaper. Grant Ford Empire built on lies. The secret ledger exposed. Tony's investigation was everywhere. On television, radio, social media feeds. For the first time, the city saw the scandal not through the lens of power, but through the eyes of its victims. The article was damning. It detailed everything. The secret shell companies, the bribes and laundering, the forged signatures, the families forced from their homes, the receipts, the digital backups, the voices of dozens who'd been silenced for years. Samuel held a press conference on the steps of City Hall, flanked by Amara and a half-dozen survivors. Cameras flashed as Samuel read from the ledger, his deep voice steady. This is not just a family's shame. It is a crime against Atlanta. As the story broke, the city buzzed with disbelief and outrage. Activists marched in the streets calling for criminal charges. Former Grant and Ford employees came forward with their own files and emails. Churches rang bells in support. Local radio DJs played Amara's story between songs. Maria and Jerome stood with her at every event, offering quiet strength. Uncle Reggie, once afraid to speak, gave interviews about what he'd witnessed. We all lost something when the Grants ruled this city, he said. But now, thanks to Amara, we might get it back. The pressure worked. City Council called for a full investigation. The mayor, previously a Grant ally, announced a task force to look into patterns of fraud and abuse across the real estate industry. Police investigators arrived at Grant Holdings and the Ford Foundation offices, seizing computers and files. Marcia and Eli tried to spin the news, blaming rogue elements and accusing Amara of personal vendetta. Their statements only fueled more scrutiny. Meanwhile, Samuel filed a civil suit on behalf of dozens of victims, naming every major executive, including Marcia, Eli, and the twins. The class action was airtight, built from the ground up by people who had once been dismissed as powerless. Amara, for her part, refused to gloat. In interviews, she spoke not about revenge, but about responsibility and community. They used our city for their profit, but we can rebuild together. But not everyone welcomed her return. Late-night calls warned her to back off. Her photo appeared with a red X spray-painted across it on a construction site wall. Samuel hired a private security firm to watch over the nonprofit and Amara's allies. Still, the movement grew. Donations poured in for Open Door ATL. Volunteers arrived from neighborhoods that had once shut Amara out. The Phoenix House's waiting list doubled overnight. And then, in the midst of the chaos, a city prosecutor reached out. We're preparing criminal indictments, but we need your full testimony and we need you safe. Are you ready? Amara looked at the ledger, at Maria and Jerome, at a city finally awake. She nodded, her voice clear. I'm ready. Let's finish what they started. The tables had turned. Amara was no longer the auctioned heart, the scapegoat, or the fallen heiress. She was the spark that threatened to burn down the old order. The city was watching, and this time, it was Justice's turn to bid highest. The courthouse steps had never seen a crowd like this. TV vans double-parked, protesters waving signs, former Grant employees pressing against velvet ropes. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation and fear. Amara walked through it all with Samuel at her side, head high, her allies behind her. Today, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced or sold. The courtroom itself was a theater of power. The Grant Ford legal team filled 3 rows, their suits gleaming and laptops ready. Marcia, cold as marble, barely glanced at Amara. Eli arrived in a tailored suit, hand in hand with a new fiancé, his latest PR strategy. The twins sat beside Marcia, looking bored, their phones flickering with texts from their socialite friends. Samuel's opening statement electrified the jury. This case is not only about money, but about dignity. About how one family's greed bled a city dry and discarded its own daughter to cover their crimes. Today, you will hear the truth. Not the one written by headlines, but by the victims themselves. Over several tense days, the prosecution called a parade of witnesses. Maria, who described losing her home to a clerical error that turned out to be a deliberate eviction. Jerome, who was laid off and blackballed for refusing to falsify safety reports. Uncle Reggie, who choked up as he read aloud from the secret ledger. City officials, finally willing to admit under oath the pattern of bribes and intimidation. Samuel built the case brick by brick, drawing lines from forged documents to bank accounts, from shell corporations to lavish gifts, from broken promises to shattered lives. Then it was Amara's turn. She took the stand, her hand steady, voice clear. The Grant attorneys tried to paint her as an embittered daughter with a vendetta. But Amara answered every question with facts and heart. She described the marriage contract, the forged signatures, her exclusion from every real decision. She explained how she'd rebuilt her life from nothing, not as a victim, but as an architect of hope. "Were you ever given a real choice?" the opposing lawyer pressed. Amara met Marcia's eyes across the courtroom. "No, but I made my own in the end." The defense countered with their own parade of experts and family loyalists. Marcia denied everything, tears perfectly timed for the cameras. Eli claimed he'd been duped by rogue accountants. The twins rolled their eyes and blamed Amara for ruining the family's name. The cross-examinations grew brutal. The Grant lawyers leaked old photos of Amara partying in college, painted her affordable housing work as a self-serving PR stunt, and even dragged Isaac's name through the mud, claiming Amara's reckless first love nearly bankrupted the company years ago. But Samuel was ready for every dirty trick. When the defense tried to dismiss the secret ledger as forged, he produced corroborating bank statements, emails, and witnesses. He revealed how the Grant lawyers had threatened whistleblowers and introduced city officials ready to testify about cover-ups. Outside, the city followed every twist, hungry for justice. Supporters held vigils and fundraisers for open-door ATL. Opponents jeered, but their numbers dwindled as the evidence mounted. In closing arguments, Samuel faced the jury and said, Amara Grant was auctioned off, then thrown away. But she chose to fight, not for revenge, but to restore what her family destroyed. Now you have the power to decide. Will Atlanta belong to the powerful few, or to all its people? The judge's instructions were clear. The jury withdrew and the city waited. In the courthouse hallway, Amara hugged Maria, Jerome, and Uncle Reggie. She saw hope in their eyes, and a future she had built herself, brick by brick. Whatever the verdict, Amara had already reclaimed her soul. But the city and her legacy still hung in the balance. The jury deliberated for hours that felt like days. The city, holding its collective breath, crowded around courthouse TVs and live blogs. At last, the bailiff's voice echoed through the packed chamber. Will the foreperson please stand? Amara's heart hammered in her chest. Her hands were warm in Maria's grip. Jerome on her other side, Samuel nodded encouragement, his eyes brimming with the fierce pride of a mentor and comrade. The foreperson's words rang out, crisp and undeniable. On the count of fraud, we find the defendants, Marcia Grant, Eli Ford, and associates, guilty. On the count of money laundering, guilty. On the count of conspiracy and witness intimidation, guilty. On the count of wrongful eviction and property theft, guilty. A hush fell over the courtroom, then a tidal wave of gasps and relieved sobs. Marcia's face drained of color. Eli sank in his chair. Mask shattered. The twins gaped in disbelief, fingers frozen over their phones. The Grant Ford legal team looked down, defeated. The judge's gavel brought order back. All Grant Ford assets are to be frozen and seized by the state. Victims named in the suit will receive restitution from these assets. The defendants are hereby remanded into custody, pending further criminal sentencing. Reporters burst from the courtroom to broadcast the verdict. Outside, church bells pealed and people danced in the streets. For the first time, the city celebrated not a dynasty, but the fall of a regime built on greed. As cameras converged on her, Amara's words were calm, but clear. This isn't about destroying a family. It's about rebuilding a city. Justice means we get to heal, to house our neighbors, to dream bigger than any boardroom. Samuel beamed, giving a rare smile. You did it, girl. Not just for yourself, for all of us. In the weeks that followed, the city changed. State officials and prosecutors announced new reforms. The mayor launched an inquiry into corruption across Atlanta's real estate industry. Samuel and his team established a fund, financed by seized assets, to support affordable housing, legal clinics, and small businesses, once ruined by the Grant Ford empire. Open door. ATL expanded overnight. New partners joined the project. Old adversaries asked for a second chance. Volunteers poured in, drawn by Amara's story, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of ordinary people to reclaim their world. But Amara's victory was also deeply personal. She was exonerated in every news headline. Schools asked her to speak. A local college offered her a teaching position in their architecture department. Her father, finally breaking free from Marcia's shadow, called her with a choked apology. I should have protected you, he said, but you protected us all. She forgave him, but not the past. Some scars would never fully heal, and that was all right. As for Marcia, Eli, and the twins, Atlanta's elite turned their backs. The social invitations dried up. Their names, once wielded like a weapon, became a cautionary tale whispered at charity galas and in business schools. One morning, Amara returned to the Phoenix house. The walls were filled with photos of families, smiling, safe, home at last. Maria hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. You built more than houses, Amara. You built us a future. That night, Amara walked the city streets, anonymous at last, the weight of the Grant name replaced by something lighter. Pride, gratitude, peace. Her revenge, in the end, had not just been justice for herself. It had become a beacon for all who needed a second chance. But there was one chapter left to write. A future she would choose, not inherit. Tomorrow, the city would wake to new headlines. But for now, Amara allowed herself to rest. Her past finally put to rest, and her heart, no longer auctioned, but wholly her own. A year had passed since the verdict, but for Amara, it felt like a lifetime. The world that had once belonged to the Grant Ford dynasty was gone, replaced by a city determined never to repeat its mistakes. The Phoenix house, once just a dream on a battered blueprint, was now the heart of a movement, a symbol that even from the ashes, something beautiful could rise. Amara spent her days in the community, teaching design workshops, mentoring teenagers, meeting with city officials to push for affordable housing policy. Her phone buzzed constantly with requests, thank yous, and stories from people she'd never met. Families who had found safety, kids who had a place to sleep, elders who finally felt respected. Open Door ATL had become a force. 5 new houses had opened. Dozens more were planned. Amara and her team, Maria, Jerome, Uncle Reggie, and even a few former rivals, met every week in a bright mural-covered office, plotting ways to help more people claim a piece of Atlanta as their own. The city recognized her now, not as a socialite or a scandal, but as a leader. She was invited to speak at universities, honored at City Hall, quoted on talk shows. When her face appeared in the news, it was next to headlines about resilience, hope, and justice. But Amara's greatest satisfaction came in the quiet moments, planting a garden with neighborhood kids, listening to Maria's son read his first book, laughing with Jerome over bad coffee at the end of a long day. The joy was different from anything the old Grant world had offered. Deeper, warmer, real. One afternoon, as she worked on plans for a new community center, a letter arrived from Isaac. He wrote from a city far away, where he'd built a family of his own. I always knew you'd do something that mattered. I'm proud of you, Mara. Thank you for never letting them decide your worth. She smiled through tears, knowing their story had ended. But the love and belief they'd shared had helped shape who she became. Even Atlanta's politicians, once wary, now courted her support. But Amara was careful. She refused offers that would make her a pawn or a mascot. She reminded every official, "This isn't about names or titles. It's about homes, safety, dignity, about building a city where no one is auctioned, ever again." Marquia, Eli and the twins faded into obscurity. Their former empire split up and sold for restitution. Her father, quietly working as a consultant, sometimes attended open-door events, always sitting in the back. No longer the patriarch, but just another grateful soul. At the anniversary block party, hundreds gathered in the shadow of the Phoenix house. Maria's famous mac and cheese filled the air with laughter and warmth. Jerome strummed his guitar. Kids painted banners that read, "Home is more than a house." Amara took the mic as dusk settled. She spoke of failure, forgiveness, and the power of community. I was taught that family was about power and inheritance. But real family is who you build with, who you stand beside when things fall apart, and who helps you dream again. You all are my legacy. The crowd roared. As she stepped down, a little girl hugged her waist. "Miss Amara, I want to be like you. I want to help people have homes." Amara knelt smiling. "You already are, sweetheart. You already are." Later that night, she stood on the roof of the Phoenix house, the city lights twinkling below. The scars of her old life no longer ached. The pain, the betrayal, the public shaming. None of it could touch what she had built with her own 2 hands. She was no longer an auctioned heart. She was a builder, a healer, a leader. This was her legacy, one of justice, hope, and love, shining brighter than any fortune could have promised. And as long as even one child found shelter, even one neighbor found dignity, Amara knew her sweetest revenge had come true. Not in their ruin, but in her own rebirth.